She ran a $1 billion empire. He fixed broken pipes at midnight. The night they met inside a locked elevator 32 floors above Manhattan, neither of them walked away the same. What happened behind those glass walls? The secret she was hiding, the battle she was losing, and the one ordinary man who refused to let her disappear will shake you to your core. If this story moves you, hit like, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and follow along until the very last word. This one's worth staying for. The elevator didn't make a sound when it stopped. That was the first thing Logan Hart noticed. The absence of the usual mechanical groan, the click of cables settling, the hiss of the doors preparing to open. Just silence. Dead, complete, wrong silence at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, while a thunderstorm turned the streets of Manhattan into rivers, and Logan was pushing a maintenance cart down the service corridor on the 32nd floor with sore feet and a head full of nothing in particular. He almost kept walking. The indicator light above the private elevator, the one reserved exclusively for the penthouse unit, the one he'd been told during orientation never to touch, never to service unless specifically dispatched, never to acknowledge if he happened to see its occupant step out, that light was amber. Not moving. Amber meant stopped. Amber meant malfunction, or a sensor trip, or something stuck in the door track. Logan set the brake on his cart, checked his radio. His supervisor, Marcus, had clocked out 2 hours ago and left Logan to handle the overnight sweep alone. Same as every Tuesday since he'd taken this job 4 months back. He tried the elevator panel on the wall. The diagnostic readout told him the car was sitting still at floor 32 with both doors closed and no destination registered. He pressed the intercom button. Nothing. He pressed it again, held it longer. Still nothing. Logan stood there for a second, rain hammering against the window at the end of the corridor, and weighed the very simple choice in front of him. He could log it as a non-emergency sensor issue, leave a note for the morning crew, and finish his sweep. That was the correct professional response. That was what a person who wanted to keep a job paying $23 an hour with health benefits, the health benefits being the entire point, would do. He pulled out his maintenance key and opened the elevator panel. The car arrived in 11 seconds. The doors slid open. Aria Kensington was on the floor. She was on her side with her back against the mirrored wall, one knee drawn up, one arm stretched across the marble floor of the elevator like she'd reached for something and missed. Her jacket, charcoal gray, the kind that costs more than Logan's monthly rent, was twisted around her torso. Her phone was 6 inches from her fingertips. Her hair, dark brown and sharply cut, had fallen across her face. Logan was inside the elevator before he finished thinking about it. He crouched down and put 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse there, present, a little fast but steady. He could hear her breathing, shallow but rhythmic. Not a cardiac event. He scanned her face, her lips, the fine tension still holding in her jaw even in unconsciousness, and recognized the posture without being able to name it immediately, the way the body curls slightly inward when the lungs have been fighting. He'd seen it before. That was the thing. He'd seen it in a different room, on a different woman, and he'd been slower that time. "Hey," he said, not loud, firm. "Hey, can you hear me?" She didn't move. "My name's Logan. I work maintenance in this building. You're on the floor of your elevator. I'm going to check your airway, and then I'm going to call for help unless you tell me not to." He moved her hair back from her face. Up close, she looked younger than the photographs he'd seen in the lobby display case, the framed profile piece about the building's most notable resident that the property management company had put up, and that Logan had read once at 2 a.m. out of boredom. 30 years old. Founder and CEO of Kensington Systems, which apparently did something significant with enterprise cloud infrastructure, according to the article. The article had used the word visionary 4 times. Right now, she looked like someone who had been running very hard for a very long time and had simply stopped. Her eyes opened. They were dark, and for a moment they didn't focus on anything. Then they found him. He watched awareness come back in stages: confusion, location, situation, and then, sharply and unmistakably, alarm. She pushed herself upright against the mirror. It wasn't graceful. Her elbow slipped and she had to try twice, and Logan instinctively reached out to steady her arm, and she pulled away from his hand like he'd burned her. "Don't." Her voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. Don't touch me. Okay, Logan said. He sat back on his heels and gave her space. You were unconscious on the floor. I work maintenance. I'm not going to call anyone if you don't want me to, but I need to know you're all right before I leave. She stared at him. Taking inventory, he could tell. Reading the uniform, the cart visible through the open doors, the service key still in the wall panel. Processing. How long? She said. I don't know how long you were down before I got here. I called through the intercom twice and got no answer. Maybe 5 minutes total since I opened the panel. She closed her eyes briefly, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. When she opened them again, something had shifted. The alarm was still there underneath, but she'd pulled a layer of composure over it the way you'd throw a drop cloth over something you didn't want people to see. This doesn't leave this elevator, she said. Logan looked at her. Can you stand? I asked you a question. I heard you. Can you stand or do you need help? A pause. Something moved across her face. Irritation, or maybe the recognition that he hadn't answered, which amounted to the same thing in her world, he suspected. I can stand, she said. She couldn't, quite, not on the first attempt. Her left knee buckled and she caught the railing along the elevator wall and held on, and Logan stood and positioned himself beside her without touching her, close enough that if she went down again, he'd catch her. She made it upright, held the rail for 3 seconds. Let go. Okay, she said, mostly to herself. Your penthouse is 2 floors up, Logan said. I can take you up in this car or walk you to the stairs. Your choice. I know where my apartment is. I know you do. She looked at him again, and this time it was longer, more careful. He held her gaze without any particular expression. Elevator, she said. He pressed PH, the doors closed. The car moved upward. They stood on opposite sides of the elevator in silence. Logan watched the floor numbers change. Arya watched the door. He could see her reflection in the mirror, the careful control in her posture, the slight whiteness around her knuckles where her hand had closed around the clutch she'd picked up from the floor. You're the night technician, she said. Tuesday through Saturday, yeah. You've been here 4 months. He glanced at her. You pay attention to building staff? I pay attention to everyone who has access to my floor. Fair enough. The doors opened to the penthouse vestibule. Marble, a single orchid on a console table, indirect lighting, the quiet of expensive insulation blocking the storm completely. Arya stepped out. Logan stayed in the elevator. She walked 4 steps, then stopped. She didn't turn around. What's your name? Logan Hart. A beat. The elevator needs its sensor recalibrated. That's why it stopped. He looked at the panel. The sensor was fine. He'd seen the diagnostic. She knew that. She was giving him a reason, an official version. I'll put in the work order, he said. The elevator doors started to close. She still hadn't turned around. Hart, she said. Yeah. I wasn't unconscious for long. He let the doors finish closing. He thought about her on the train home. He didn't want to, particularly. He had other things to think about, starting with the fact that his daughter Maisie had a school project due Thursday, and he hadn't bought the poster board yet, and ending with the fact that his alternator was making a sound it shouldn't be making. But the image stayed with him. Arya Kensington, billionaire, on the floor of her own elevator, and the look in her eyes when she'd surfaced back to consciousness. Not pain, not embarrassment exactly. Fear, clean and specific and practiced, like someone who'd been afraid of this particular thing for long enough that they'd built a whole system around managing it. He knew that look. He'd watched it for 18 months in a different face. Logan got off the train at his stop and walked 3 blocks in the rain to the apartment building where he rented a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor. The super had been promising to fix the vestibule light for 6 weeks. Logan walked up the stairs in the dark, using his phone flashlight, and let himself in quietly. The babysitter, Mrs. Okafor from 4C, who was 61 and charged $12 an hour and was worth 4 times that, was asleep in the armchair with a true crime paperback open on her chest. Maisie was in her room. Logan checked on his daughter. She was curled up in her bed with 3 stuffed animals and an expression of complete peace that she only had when she was sleeping, and that he stood in the doorway and watched for probably longer than he needed to, the same way he'd been doing since she was born. 7 years old, dark hair like her mother's. His stubbornness, which was either flattering or concerning depending on the day. He pulled her door halfway closed, paid Mrs. Okafor, helped her to the door because she had a bad hip, and then stood in his kitchen and drank a glass of water and thought about what he'd seen tonight. The medications in her purse, he'd noticed them when he'd moved her hair back, a prescription bottle that had rolled partially out. He hadn't read the label. He hadn't tried to. But he knew the shape of that bottle, the orange plastic and white cap, the particular size that meant a maintenance prescription, not an emergency one, something she took regularly. He put the glass in the sink and went to bed. He didn't call anyone. He didn't write anything down. And in the morning, he put in a work order for a sensor calibration on the penthouse elevator that didn't need one because Aria Kensington had asked him for a story, and he'd decided, without entirely knowing why, to give it to her. 3 days passed. On Friday night, Logan was replacing a corroded pipe coupling in the mechanical room on the 20th floor when his radio crackled with a request from the front desk. Penthouse had a report of a temperature irregularity in the main HVAC duct. Could maintenance take a look? Marcus was still on shift. He looked at Logan across the mechanical room. "You want it, or should I go?" "I'll go," Logan said, and didn't examine why. The penthouse was different at 11 p.m. than he'd imagined. He'd expected something from a magazine. Cool, minimal, the kind of place where nothing was out of place because everything was decorative and nothing was lived in. What he found was different. It was large, yes. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a wet Manhattan, the city lights fractured by rain. Expensive furniture, yes, but there were files everywhere. Actual paper files stacked on the kitchen island, spread across the coffee table, piled along the left side of the L-shaped couch. A whiteboard had been dragged in from somewhere and positioned against the far wall, covered in a dense web of handwriting that Logan couldn't read from the doorway. 3 laptops were open at different points around the room. And Aria was in the kitchen, still dressed in work clothes at 11 at night, pouring coffee with the particular efficiency of someone who had stopped tasting it and was just maintaining a chemical requirement. She saw him in the doorway and stopped. "HVAC issue," Logan said, holding up his radio. "Desk called it in." "I called it in," she said. "The temperature in the east bedroom keeps dropping. It woke me up twice last night." "I'll take a look." He stepped inside, setting his bag down. She watched him cross to the east bedroom. He opened the access panel in the closet, checked the duct damper. It was slightly misaligned. Not a major issue, 15 minutes to fix. He realigned it, ran a function test, confirmed the temperature reading stabilized. When he came back out, she was at the kitchen island with her coffee and a tablet, not looking at him. "Should hold now, Mom," he said. Damper was off by about 20 degrees. Common in older systems after a temperature swing. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, still looking at the tablet. "Maintenance? About 4 years. Before that I was in systems engineering." That made her look up. "What kind?" "Mechanical systems for commercial construction. I worked for a firm in Jersey for 6 years." "Why'd you leave?" Logan picked up his bag. "Family stuff." She held his gaze for a moment. "The night in the elevator," she said. "Sensor malfunction," Logan said. "I put in the work order. You should have a copy." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. "Right," she said. He moved toward the door. Stopped. Turned around once because there was something he wanted to say, and he generally regretted it when he didn't say things. "You should probably sleep," he said. "Whatever's in those files, it's going to look exactly the same tomorrow, and you'll read it better after 6 hours. She stared at him. "I'm not trying to be your doctor," he said. "I'm just telling you what I'd tell anyone." "You don't know anything about what I'm managing." "No," he agreed. "I don't." He left. In the elevator going down, he thought about the whiteboard. The names on it. Executive names, he thought, though he'd only seen it for a second. A web of connections with lines between them, the kind of diagram you made when you were trying to track something complicated, or when someone was coming for you and you were trying to figure out from which direction. The lobby display case had been updated. There was a new article a printed copy of a financial news piece framed alongside the profile. Logan read it on his break at 2 in the morning. Kensington Systems faces board challenge over leadership direction. The article was 3 weeks old. It described a faction of board members. The piece named three: Gerald Marsh, Stephen Okafor, and Diane Pullman, who had reportedly raised concerns about strategic continuity and executive capacity and were calling for a special session. The article used the phrase hostile overture and noted that Marsh had recently acquired a significant additional stake in the company. Logan read it twice. Then he read the profile again. Aria Kensington had founded Kensington Systems at 22, had taken it public at 27, had grown it from a 4-person startup to a company with 800 employees, an valuation the article described as north of $4 billion. The profile called her relentlessly private and quoted a competitor who described her as the best systems thinker I've ever encountered and also impossible to read. Logan thought about her on the floor of the elevator, about the medications, about the whiteboard. He folded his brake wrapper into a square and put it in his pocket and went back to work. The following Tuesday, he was servicing a water heater on the 26th floor when he heard voices around the corner. 2 men, not quite quiet enough, coming from the direction of the elevator bank. Already pulling the records. Marsh has someone inside the compliance team. That's faster than we expected. He doesn't want to wait. If she has another episode before the quarterly, then we push the narrative before she can get ahead of it. Logan finished what he was doing slowly and listened. The voices moved away toward the stairwell. He caught a partial look. Business clothes, late 40s, one of them carrying a leather portfolio. Not residents, visitors. At 7 in the evening. He noted the time on his log. Wrote down what he'd heard. Wrote down what he could describe of the 2 men. He wasn't sure yet why he was doing that. He just knew that "she has another episode" was a phrase that sat badly in his chest. Maisie wanted to know about his job. She asked on Saturday morning, which was Logan's day off, while they were eating cereal at the kitchen table, and she was drawing something elaborate involving what appeared to be a dragon wearing a backpack. "What do you actually do?" she asked. "When things break?" "I figure out what's wrong and I fix it," Logan said. "How do you figure it out?" "I look at all the parts that could be broken and I check them one by one until I find the one that's causing the problem." Maisie considered this. "What if it's not one part? What if it's a lot of parts?" "Then I write it all down and figure out which one started it." She nodded, satisfied by this, and returned to her dragon. Logan drank his coffee and thought about the whiteboard in the penthouse, about the way Aria had mapped out the connections with different colored markers, red lines versus blue lines. She was doing the same thing he'd described to Maisie, looking at all the parts, trying to find where it started. He thought about the 2 men in business clothes. He thought about compliance records. Well, on Wednesday evening, he was doing a routine fire suppression check on the 31st floor when he found the door to the building's secondary data closet, a small room housing backup network infrastructure for the building management systems, slightly ajar. It was always locked. He pushed it open. Nothing missing, as far as he could tell, but the cable tray above the server rack had been disturbed. He could see it in the dust pattern. Something had been placed up there and removed or accessed from up there. Logan stood in the middle of that small, cold room for a long minute. The building used the same network infrastructure vendor as Kensington Systems, according to the lobby profile. Something Aria had negotiated when she moved in. Streamlined integration. The article had mentioned it, almost as an aside. He pulled out his phone and took 6 photographs. The cable tray. The dust pattern. The door lock, which showed no signs of forced entry. He knocked on the penthouse door at 9:15. It took her a while to answer. He stood in the vestibule and waited, and when the door opened, she was in different clothes than she'd been wearing when he'd last seen her. Dark trousers, a loose gray shirt, no shoes, and her expression when she saw him was complicated in a way he didn't try to fully decode. "I don't have an HVAC problem," she said. "I know," Logan said. "Can I come in?" A pause. She stepped back. He came in and put his phone on the kitchen island, pulled up the photographs, walked her through what he'd found, the door, the cable tray, the dust, the access log he'd pulled which showed a building entry at 11 p.m. on Monday, from a visitor badge that had been processed under the name of a licensed electrician, whose company, when Logan had looked it up on his lunch break, turned out to have been dissolved 14 months ago. Arya stood at the island and looked at the photographs. He watched her face. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone receiving a piece of evidence they'd already suspected, but hadn't yet been able to touch. "The building management network connects to your infrastructure," Logan said. "I know that." "Then you know that if someone can get into the data closet with building access, they can run a passive monitor on traffic I route through the integrated systems." "Yes." She looked up from the phone. "I've been looking for the entry point for 3 weeks." "I think I just found it." She stared at him. "I'm a maintenance tech," he said preemptively, "and I understand that this is not my business, but it's also in my building, on my watch, and I just found what looks like an active security intrusion. That makes it at least partly my business." The silence stretched. Arya looked back at the photographs, scrolled through them slowly. Her face had closed down, not in the way it had in the elevator, afraid and trying to hide it, but focused, fully, coldly focused. "That badge entry," she said. "You pulled the access log yourself?" "From the building management panel, which I have clearance for. And you saved it?" "I forwarded a copy to my personal email before I came up here, yes." She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, exactly. Not yet. More like the recalculation that happens when you've categorized something incorrectly and you're revising. "Marsh is going to move in the next 2 weeks," she said, and it came out flat, almost automatic, like she'd said it to herself enough times that it had lost any dramatic weight. "He has at least 2 people on the compliance team. He's been building a case around my health for 6 months. If he gets access to my medical records through a monitored channel, is that possible?" Logan asked. "Would your medical information transit the building network?" "My personal health management application uses an API that syncs through the integrated connection 3 times a day." She pressed her lips together. "I set it up for convenience. I didn't think—" She stopped. "You didn't think someone would access the building's data infrastructure to get to it?" "No." Logan was quiet for a moment. Then, "You need someone to document this cleanly and hand it to the right people before Marsh can use whatever he's already collected." "I have legal counsel." "I'm sure you do. I'm talking about evidence, not arguments." He picked up his phone. "I can put together a full technical report on the access point, entry logs, cable tray documentation, the credential anomaly on the badge. That's a paper trail a regulator can look at." She was very still. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question was direct, and she asked it like she actually wanted the answer, not like she was performing suspicion. Logan thought about how to answer honestly. "Because I've seen what happens when someone is going through something serious and the people around them only care about what they can use from it," he said. "I don't have a stake in your company. I don't know Gerald Marsh. I'm not trying to get anything from you." He paused. "And whatever you're dealing with medically is your business, but the fact that someone is planning to use it against you makes me angry." Arya looked at him for a long time. "Do you want coffee?" she said finally. "Sure." She moved to the kitchen and he followed, and she poured 2 cups in silence, and for a few minutes they stood on opposite sides of the island with the photographs between them and the storm still going outside the windows, and neither of them said anything. And it was the first time Logan had been in a room with another adult in a long time without feeling like he needed to fill the space. "The breathing thing," he said eventually, not pressing, just leaving it available. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Reactive airway dysfunction, triggered by stress and certain environmental factors. I've had it for 3 years." She said it the way you say something when you've practiced saying it without emotion. "It's managed. It's not going to kill me. But if it becomes public knowledge before I can frame the narrative, the board will use it to argue I'm not fit to run a public company." "Are you?" She looked at him sharply. "I'm asking," Logan said. "Not Marsh, not the board. I'm asking." A beat. "Yes," she said. "I'm better at this when I'm managing the condition than most executives are in full health." "Then that's what matters." He set down his cup. "Get me access to the building records I need, and I'll put together a report that takes Marsh's entry point off the table. Whatever else you're planning, that piece should be solid. You could lose your job for accessing those records. I have clearance for the building management panel, Logan said. I checked before I came up here. For the first time, very briefly, something that was almost a smile crossed Arya Kensington's face. It didn't last long, but Logan noticed it. Leave me your number, she said. He wrote it on the notepad by her landline. She actually had a landline, which he found oddly reassuring, and picked up his bag. Logan, she said as he reached the door. He turned. The night in the elevator. She held his gaze steady, like this cost something. Thank you. A sensor malfunction, Logan said. I put in the work order. He took the elevator down to 32 and pushed his cart to the next item on his maintenance log, and the rain kept hitting the windows. And somewhere above him, Arya Kensington stood in her penthouse with 2 cups of coffee cooling on the island, surrounded by files, and for the first time in 3 weeks, did not feel entirely alone. He told Maisie almost nothing about his days. This was partly habit and partly protection, and partly the fact that she was 7 and mostly wanted to talk about her own days, which were significantly more interesting to her than his. But that Saturday, she was at the table drawing again, and she said, unprompted, Dad, do you think people can be good at their jobs even if they're sick? Logan looked up from his book. Where'd that come from? Maisie shrugged. My teacher was absent yesterday because she was sick, and Jonah said she's always sick, and she should get a different job, and I said that was mean, and he said it was just true. Jonah's wrong, Logan said. How do you know? You don't know Jonah. I know that being sick doesn't make you bad at your job. Sometimes it makes people better at it, because they know how to keep going when things are hard. Maisie thought about this with the particular gravity that 7-year-olds apply to ethical questions when they've decided to take them seriously. Like when you went to work when you had that cold for 2 weeks. Yeah, exactly like that. That was dumb, though, she said. You should have rested. You're right, Logan said. I should have. She returned to her drawing. Logan looked at his book and didn't read it. He thought about a woman on the floor of an elevator and the way she'd pulled herself upright on the second try and how that had looked, from where he was sitting, exactly like what he'd told Maisie. Someone who knew how to keep going when things were hard. The question was whether the people trying to stop her were going to learn that before it was too late. He picked up his phone and looked at the notes he'd made over the past 2 weeks. The voices on the 26th floor, the data closet, the badge access, the dissolved company, the compliance team connection Arya had mentioned. He opened a new document and started writing. He had work to do. The report took Logan 11 days to finish. Not because the technical documentation was complicated. He'd written systems reports for 6 years in his previous life, and the format came back to him the way old muscle memory does. A little stiff at first and then suddenly fluid. But because he was doing it in pieces between shifts, on his phone, on the train, and on his laptop at the kitchen table, after Maisie was in bed. He didn't rush it. Rushed reports had gaps, and gaps were what people like Gerald Marsh lived inside. He cross-referenced the badge entry logs against the building's vendor credentialing system. The dissolved company, Harwick Electrical Solutions LLC, registered in Delaware, last filed a tax return 26 months ago, had been listed as an approved contractor in the building system for 3 years. Someone had added it, someone with administrative access to the building management database, which narrowed the field considerably. Logan pulled the admin access log for that entry, found a timestamp from 14 months ago and a user credential that belonged to a facilities coordinator who had left the company 8 months back. He wrote all of it down. Dates, credential IDs, access timestamps, cable tray photographs with metadata intact. He cross-referenced the Monday intrusion with Kensington Systems' public investor call schedule. Arya had an earnings preview call that Wednesday, which meant her health application would have synced at least twice in the 12 hours prior, which meant whoever accessed that infrastructure on Monday night had the timing exactly right. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned and patient, and it had been running for a while. He sent the completed report to Arya at 11:40 on a Thursday night with a short message. Full technical documentation attached, entry point identified, credential chain documented, timing correlation noted. Your call on what to do with it. Her response came back in 4 minutes. Can you come up? He was already in the building, finishing his shift. He went up. She'd cleared the coffee table. Files were still everywhere else. The apartment had the permanent look of a war room that someone was also trying to sleep in. But the table was clear, and she had his report open on her laptop and a second laptop beside it with what looked like internal company records pulled up. "Sit down," she said, and it came out less like an invitation and more like she'd forgotten for a moment that she was in her own home talking to someone she'd known for under 3 weeks. Logan sat. "This credential change," she said, turning the laptop toward him and pointing at the screen. "The facilities coordinator, Marcus Del Rey." "He left the building management company 8 months ago," Logan said. "I know where he went." She turned the second laptop. "He's currently contracted to a consulting firm that Gerald Marsh has used for 3 separate projects in the past 2 years, Data Systems Consulting." Logan looked at the screen. "So Marsh seeded the credential before Del Rey left. 14 months ago, which is—" She stopped, pressed her fingers against the edge of the table for a second. "Which is 1 month after I turned down his proposal to restructure the board's oversight committee. He wanted rotating executive review authority. I said no." "He started building the access point 1 month after you said no," Logan said. "He's been preparing this for over a year." She said it quietly, like she was still finishing the calculation. "I knew he was moving. I didn't know how far back it started." The room was quiet except for the sound of the city 32 floors below. Logan looked at the 2 laptops, the evidence laid out between them. "This is enough to take to a securities attorney," he said. "The credential chain connects Marsh to unauthorized infrastructure access. If he's been monitoring your health data through that channel, that's potentially HIPAA territory on top of the securities implications." "My attorneys have been telling me to be patient," Arya said. "With respect, your attorneys aren't the ones whose medical information is sitting in someone else's hands." She looked at him. "No," she said, "they're not." She stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water and set one in front of him without asking. It struck him as an unconscious gesture, the kind of thing you did when you were used to being alone and had recently become less alone and hadn't fully registered the adjustment yet. "Tell me something," she said, sitting back down. "You worked in mechanical systems engineering. Good firm, you said." "Decent firm." "Why maintenance?" "Not judgment. I'm genuinely asking." Logan picked up the glass of water. "My wife got sick when Maisie was 18 months old. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. I took leave to handle things at home. The firm held my position for 6 months and then, politely, didn't." He said it without particular weight. It was just the sequence of events. "She died when Maisie was 3. I needed something with stable hours, health benefits, and shift flexibility for pickup and drop-off. Night maintenance fit." Arya was watching him with an expression that wasn't quite pity. Pity had a kind of distance in it, but something more adjacent to it, like she was recalculating again. "I'm sorry," she said. 3.5 years ago, Logan said. "We manage." "That's why you—" She stopped. "That's why I recognized what I was looking at in the elevator," he finished. "Yeah." She set her glass down, looked at the table. When she spoke again, her voice was a half-degree different, still controlled, but with something underneath it that he hadn't heard before. "The condition started 2 years after I founded the company," she said. "I was 24. I thought it was stress. My doctor thought it was stress. We managed it as stress for 8 months before someone ran the right panel and figured out what it actually was. By then, I'd already had 3 episodes." She paused. "I learned very quickly that the wrong people knowing about it changed how they treated me. Not with concern, with—" She searched for the word. "Calculation. They started looking for the angle," Logan said. "Yes. Marsh. Marsh has been building a case for 6 months that my health makes me a liability. The legal argument is capacity, whether the board can demonstrate that my condition affects my executive judgment." She said this with a flat, clinical precision that told him she'd gone over it enough times that the emotion had been worn smooth, the way a stone gets smooth in a river. "It's a bad faith argument with a factual veneer. But if he can get my medical records into the public sphere before I control the framing, the stock moves before anyone reads the fine print. And by the time the fine print gets read, the damage is done," Logan said. "Investor psychology doesn't wait for nuance." Logan thought for a moment. Your earnings preview is next Wednesday. Yes? If Marsh is moving on your data, he'll want to time the release for maximum impact. Before the call, so the call becomes damage control instead of good news. Arya nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. Then we have about a week. He tapped the edge of his report. This goes to your attorneys tomorrow, not next week. She looked at him. You said your call. I was being polite, Logan said. It's your call, but I'd make it fast. Something that might have been amusement under other circumstances crossed her face. You're not what I expected, she said. I get that a lot, Logan said, which wasn't true at all, but it made her mouth do that almost smile thing again, and that seemed like a reasonable outcome. He expected distance after that. That was usually how it worked when you'd been useful. People took what they needed, expressed appropriate gratitude, and then the dynamic reset to whatever it had been before. He'd learned not to take it personally. But Arya Kensington apparently didn't operate on the usual schedule. She called his work radio twice in the next week on actual maintenance issues, which he dealt with, but both times she opened the door herself and said a few sentences that had nothing to do with the HVAC or the water pressure. On Thursday, she asked what Maisie was studying in school. On Saturday, she was in the lobby when he clocked in, not waiting for him specifically, as far as he could tell, getting a package from the concierge, and she stopped and asked if the attorneys had been responsive. They had. They'd moved fast on the report, and Logan had been told through Arya's assistant, a harried young man named Derek, who communicated exclusively in bullet points, that his documentation was being reviewed by two separate legal teams. They think the HIPAA angle is strong, Arya told him, tucking the package under her arm. The unauthorized monitoring of health application data through a compromised building network. They're building a parallel complaint to the FTC on top of the securities questions. Marsh doesn't know you have this yet, Logan said. No. When does that change? When we're ready. She said it with a quiet certainty that he was starting to recognize as her version of confidence. Not loud, not performed, just present. Not before. Logan nodded. How are you feeling? She blinked at the directness. Fine. You look like you haven't slept more than 5 hours in 3 days. I sleep fine. Okay, he said, and let it go because he'd learned in his life that you could say a true thing once, and that was your job done. You didn't get to say it twice without being asked. She watched him not push it, and something in her expression adjusted. 4 hours, she said. Maybe. I'll sleep after Wednesday. That's a bad system, Logan said. I know, she said, and walked toward the elevator, and he could hear in the two words that she genuinely knew it and was doing it anyway, which was the most human thing she'd done in his presence yet. The Saturday before the Wednesday call, Logan took Maisie to the building. He didn't make a habit of this. He kept work and home separated the way you kept medications on a high shelf, not because anything bad would necessarily happen, but because the structure mattered. But it was an unusual Saturday. Mrs. Okafor was visiting her daughter in New Jersey. The backup sitter had a conflict, and Logan had to stop in for 2 hours to handle a pump issue in the mechanical room that couldn't wait until Tuesday. He brought Maisie and set her up in the building's small staff lounge with her sketchbook and a sandwich and instructions not to wander. She wandered in 40 minutes. He found her in the lobby, sitting cross-legged on a bench with her sketchbook open on her knees, drawing the orchid arrangement on the concierge desk. The concierge, a patient woman named Sandra, who had 2 grandkids, was leaning over her shoulder saying things like, "That petal's very good." Logan came to collect her and found Arya standing near the elevator bank, watching Maisie draw with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not guarded, not calculating, just watching, with the kind of attention people gave to things that surprised them in a way they hadn't expected to feel. "She yours?" Arya said when Logan came up beside her. "Unfortunately, yes." "Why unfortunately?" "That's a joke. She's the best part of my life." He looked at Maisie. "She's not supposed to be here. I had a pump issue." "How old?" 7. Almost 8. Arya looked at Maisie for another moment. "She has your mouth," she said, "the way she presses it when she's concentrating." Logan glanced at her, slightly thrown. "You've only seen me for—" "I pay attention," she said simply. Maisie looked up then and saw Logan and showed no guilt whatsoever about having wandered. "Dad, look! I'm drawing the flowers." She held up the sketchbook. Sandra said the flower is called a phalaenopsis. "Phalaenopsis," Arya said. "She's right." Maisie looked at Arya with the straightforward evaluation of a child who hasn't yet learned to pretend not to stare. "Are you from upstairs?" "I live here, yes." "Do you know my dad?" "We've met." "He fixes things," Maisie said with some authority. "When things break, he figures out which part is wrong." "I know," Arya said. "He's good at it." Maisie accepted this with a nod, as if it confirmed something she'd already established, and returned to her drawing. Logan looked at Arya. She was looking at Maisie still, and her face had an expression he didn't have a word for. Something between stillness and something that was almost grief, except softer than grief. Like she was looking at a version of ordinary life that had been outside her frame of reference for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it looked like. "She's wonderful," Arya said quietly. Not for Maisie to hear, just a statement. "Yeah," Logan said, "she is." They stood there for a moment, 3 feet apart, watching a 7-year-old draw an orchid in a hotel lobby while Sandra spelled out Latin botanical names, and the afternoon light came through the lobby windows at a low angle and made the marble floor look almost warm. It was the first time Logan had stood next to Arya Kensington and felt something shift. Not toward her exactly. Or not only toward her, more like something that had been locked in a particular position for a long time becoming, very slightly, less locked. He noticed it, the way you notice a change in temperature, and then he picked up his bag. "I should get her home," he said. "Of course." Arya stepped back. "Wednesday," he said. "Wednesday," she confirmed. He went to collect Maisie, who protested leaving the orchid before she'd finished the stem, and he waited while she finished the stem, and when he glanced back, Arya was gone. He found out about the executive meeting on Monday by accident. He was on the 29th floor servicing a junction box when he overheard Derek, Arya's assistant, in the corridor speaking in a low, fast voice into his phone. Logan didn't catch all of it. What he caught was, they moved the board session up to Tuesday, and she doesn't know yet, and Marsh asked for the amended agenda this morning. Logan put his tools down, thought for a second, picked up his phone and texted Arya. "Heard something from your assistant in the corridor. Accident, not intentional. Board session moved to Tuesday. Don't know if you knew." Her response came back in 90 seconds. "I didn't." "How certain?" "Fairly. He was on the phone saying you didn't know yet." A longer pause. "Can you come up tonight?" He did. He came up at 9:30 after his shift, and the war room configuration of the penthouse had intensified. The whiteboard had new connections on it, drawn in red, and Derek was there in person, sitting at the kitchen island with a laptop, looking like he'd been awake for 36 hours and was running on the fumes of professional obligation. "They moved it to avoid my counsel's preparation window," Arya said when Logan came in. She was standing at the whiteboard. "Standard Marsh. He's done this before in smaller contexts. Change the conditions fast enough that the other side is reactive instead of prepared." "Does your legal team know?" "Derek is reaching out now." She looked at the board. "The credential report. Is there anything else I'm missing? Anything in the building systems that could be a secondary access point?" "I went through all of it," Logan said. "The one closet is the only intrusion point I found." "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a full network audit, which I'm not qualified to run. But the building management system architecture has limited external integration. The data closet was the entry." He paused. "If you want a second opinion, you need a cybersecurity firm." "I have one. They're on standby. I was hoping to bring them in post-Wednesday when it would be less—" She stopped. "Less visible," Derek said, from the island. "Less likely to spook the investors who are already watching for smoke," Arya finished. She pressed her fingers against her forehead for a second. "If I bring in the cyber team before Tuesday, Marsh will read it as escalation. If I don't, I'm at the board session without confirmation of the full scope." Logan looked at the whiteboard, looked at her. "How much does the board know about what Marsh has been doing?" "The board is split, 6 members. Marsh has Pullman and Crane reliably. I have Waters and Hendricks. Yamamoto is technically neutral, but has expressed concerns about Marsh's methods. She said this from memory. No hesitation. The session tomorrow will be a motion to convene a special executive review. If it passes, they have the authority to suspend me pending outcome. Can it pass? With Yamamoto, no. Without... She looked at the board. It's close. Then Yamamoto is the conversation, Logan said. Arya turned to look at him. What? Not tomorrow, tonight. You call Yamamoto tonight and you tell him about the credential chain. Not the legal argument, just the facts. He's your swing vote, and he said he has concerns about Marsh's methods. Give him a concrete example of what those methods look like. The room was quiet. Derek was looking at Arya. Arya was looking at Logan with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not resistant, but careful, like she was running the calculus. That's not how I usually operate, she said. How do you usually operate? I build the full case, and I present it when it's airtight. You don't have until it's airtight, Logan said. You have tonight. Another silence. Derek closed his laptop, which Logan took as a form of agreement. Arya turned back to the whiteboard, stood there for a long moment, and Logan could see the cost of it. The difficulty of moving before she was ready, of trusting a partial position to carry weight it might not fully hold. This wasn't just strategy for her. This was the way she controlled the thing she was afraid of. Exposure without armor. You don't know Yamamoto, she said. It wasn't an argument. It was almost a question. No, but I know that people who say they have concerns about someone's methods usually mean it. And I know that evidence lands different when it's personal and immediate versus when it's packaged in a legal filing 3 weeks later. Arya picked up her phone from the table, set it down, picked it up again. Derek, she said. On it, Derek said, and opened his laptop again. She called Yamamoto at 9:58. Logan sat at the kitchen island with a cup of cold coffee and didn't listen to the call, looking instead at Maisie's drawing from that afternoon. She'd left her sketchbook in the lobby, and Sandra had sent it up, and Derek had put it on the island. The orchid drawing. Maisie had added a small figure beside the flowers, roughly drawn, with dark hair and a gray shirt. It took him a moment to recognize it. Arya came back into the kitchen 22 minutes later. She set her phone down on the island. Her face was unreadable. He knew something was off, she said. He didn't have specifics. The credential documentation gave him specifics. A beat. He's going to ask for a 24-hour postponement on the session to review the materials. Logan released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That's not a win, Arya said immediately. That's a delay. Marsh will adjust. I know. This isn't over. I know that too, Logan said. She stood across the island from him, and she looked tired in a way that went past the 4 hours of sleep. Tired at a deeper level, the kind that built up over months of fighting alone. She looked at the sketchbook, looked at the drawing. Your daughter drew me, she said. Apparently. She got my hair wrong. She's 7. Cut her some slack. That landed. Arya looked at him, and this time the almost smile was more than almost. It was brief and it was real, and it changed her face completely for the 2 seconds it existed. Get some sleep, Logan said, standing. All of you. He looked at Derek, who nodded with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been waiting for permission. He took the elevator down, thought about the 24-hour postponement and Marsh's next adjustment, and the earnings call Wednesday, and the cybersecurity team on standby, and the legal complaint being built, and all the moving parts of something that wasn't close to finished. He thought about Maisie drawing Arya beside the orchid. He thought about Arya's face when she'd said, she's wonderful, quiet, and private, not meant for anyone in particular. The elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened to the empty lobby, and Logan walked out into a city that was finally dry after 2 weeks of storms, the sidewalks still wet and the air cold and clean, and he walked to the train thinking about all the ways things were about to get harder before they got easier, and how he didn't have any particular ability to stop that, and how he was going to show up anyway. That was the thing about knowing how to keep going when things were hard. It wasn't a talent. It wasn't optimism. It was just a decision you made again every time, and you kept making it until the situation changed or you ran out of chances, and you tried not to confuse the two. He bought a coffee at the station and waited for his train. Yamamoto's postponement bought them 24 hours. Marsh spent 18 of them finding a workaround. Logan found out the same way he'd found out about the moved session, by being in the wrong corridor at the right time, which was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like the building itself had opinions. He was on the 31st floor replacing a ballast in a corridor light fixture when he heard Derek's voice through the stairwell door, taut and fast, the kind of voice that meant the situation had changed and not in the good direction. He pushed through the door. Derek was on the landing below, one hand on the railing, phone pressed to his ear, face the color of someone who had recently received terrible news and hadn't finished processing it. He looked up at Logan and lowered the phone. "They leaked it," Derek said. Logan came down the stairs. "The medical records?" "Not the full records." "Enough." Derek's jaw was tight. Someone sent a summary document to 3 financial journalists at 11 this morning. One of them already posted. The headline is... He looked at his phone screen and read it with the flat effect of someone reading a casualty report. Kensington Systems CEO managing undisclosed health condition, sources say. Logan stood very still on the landing. "How bad is the story?" he asked. "It's vague enough to be legal and specific enough to do damage. They have her diagnosis category. They don't have treatment details, but they have enough to make the question mark as big as Marsh needs it to be." Derek pressed his hand over his mouth for a second. "Trading opened 40 minutes ago. She's down 11%. "Does she know?" "She's known for about 20 minutes. She's..." He stopped. "You should go up." Logan went up. The penthouse was quiet, in the way that meant something was being very carefully held together. Arya was at the windows. Not at the whiteboard, not at the laptops, at the windows, standing with her back to the room, looking out at a Manhattan that was moving forward on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning with no particular awareness that it had just handed someone a very specific kind of defeat. Logan set his bag down near the door. "Arya." She didn't turn around. "I know what you're going to say." "You probably don't." She turned then. Her face was composed in the way that required active maintenance. He could see the effort in the set of her jaw, the careful stillness around her eyes. She was holding it all in her hands like something fragile that she refused to drop in front of anyone. "It's done," she said. "Whatever he released, he released. We can't unpublish it." "No, we can't. The call is tomorrow. I'm going to have an analyst call asking about my health before 9 a.m., and the call itself will have 20 minutes of questions about whether I'm fit to..." She stopped, breathed. "They're going to ask me if I'm fit to lead my own company. And what are you going to tell them?" "The truth, obviously." Her voice had an edge. "That I've been managing the condition successfully for years and it doesn't affect my executive capacity." Which is true. Which doesn't matter because the story isn't about truth, it's about doubt, and they've already planted enough. "Arya." He said it the same way he'd said it when he first came in. Level, not soft. "Stop." She looked at him. "You can be angry in a minute," he said. "Right now I need you to tell me exactly what was in the document they sent." She crossed to the kitchen island and picked up her tablet. Read him the summary. It was, as Derek had described, vague enough and specific enough. It named the condition category, referenced multiple documented episodes, and quoted an anonymous source described only as a person familiar with the executive's medical history and its potential impact on operations. "That last part," Logan said. "A person familiar with the executive's medical history and its potential impact on operations. That's not a doctor. That's someone inside the company who's been watching you." "I know who it is," Arya said. She set the tablet down. Her hands, he noticed, were very steady. "Pullman. She was in the building 6 months ago when I had an episode in my office. My assistant at the time, I had a different assistant, she told me afterward that Pullman had asked pointed questions. I should have addressed it then." "You couldn't have known she'd go this far." "I should have known." She said it with a clean precision that wasn't self-pity, but wasn't quite fair to herself either. "I've known what these people are for a year. I kept thinking the legal exposure would be enough to make them careful." "Marsh doesn't care about legal exposure," Logan said. "He cares about the stock price moving before the quarterly and then using the board's fiduciary duty argument to push the motion through before your legal team can get the complaint filed." Arya looked at him. "How do you know about fiduciary duty arguments?" I read while I wait for things to dry or set. I've been reading about hostile board actions since the night I came up here with the credential report. He leaned against the island. He doesn't need to win legally. He just needs to create enough instability that the neutral members feel like voting to preserve the company is the responsible thing. Yamamoto, she said quietly. Yamamoto, Logan confirmed. He delayed the session, not canceled it. If the stock drops enough by this afternoon, his position shifts. Fiduciary duty is a hard argument to push back against when the numbers are moving. Arya was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the whiteboard, the red lines, Marsh and Pullman and Crane, the credential chain, the access logs. Tell me about the FTC complaint, Logan said. Where is it? Filed this morning, before the leak. My attorneys moved yesterday after Yamamoto's call. She paused. It's filed, but it's not public. FTC intake doesn't make the docket immediately visible. Can it be made visible faster? She looked at him sharply. You want to go public with the complaint. I want Marsh to know you have it. Right now he thinks he's controlling the information. You have evidence of unauthorized infrastructure access connected to his network. If that becomes public, it spooks the same investors I'm trying to reassure. Or it reframes the entire story, Logan said. Right now the story is CEO has health condition, ? If you put out a statement in the next 3 hours that says Kensington Systems has filed a federal complaint regarding unauthorized access to executive data, no details, just the fact, the story becomes CEO was targeted by a surveillance operation and she caught it. The room was very quiet. That's a different story, Logan said. One where you're not the problem. You're the person who found the problem. Arya looked at him for a long time without speaking. He couldn't tell what she was thinking, and he'd learned well enough by now not to try to rush it. Derek, she said. Derek appeared from the hallway where he'd apparently been standing for the last 5 minutes. Logan gave him a look. Derek gave a small, unapologetic shrug. Get me Catherine on the phone, Arya said. My lead attorney, and pull up the statement template. Derek moved. Arya looked at Logan. If this reads as aggressive rather than defensive, it feeds the instability narrative. Then don't be aggressive, Logan said. Be factual. Here's what happened. Here's what we did. Here's where it stands. He paused. Marsh is aggressive. You be precise. She held his gaze. Then she turned to the whiteboard and picked up a red marker and began writing the bones of a statement on the white space at the edge. He watched her work. Fast, organized, no wasted motion. When she had something on the board, she stepped back and looked at it and crossed out the third sentence and rewrote it. You're good at that, Logan said. I've been doing it since I was 22, she said without looking up. Being good at it is survival. The statement went out at 2:17 in the afternoon. It was 8 sentences. It confirmed that Kensington Systems had identified and documented an unauthorized data access operation involving compromised building infrastructure credentials connected to a third party. It stated that a formal complaint had been filed with the FTC. It stated that the company had full confidence in its leadership and its legal position. It directed further questions to legal counsel. The financial press picked it up within 20 minutes. By 4 o'clock, the framing had shifted. The analyst commentary was split. Some still focused on the health story, but a significant thread was now asking questions about who had run the access operation and why. The stock was still down, but it had stopped moving. Logan was on the 24th floor replacing a failed thermostat actuator when Arya texted him. Down 6 from open, stabilizing. Marsh has gone quiet. He texted back, quiet isn't done. Her response, I know, but quiet is better than loud, thank you. He put his phone away and finished the actuator. The board session happened the following morning, Wednesday, 2 hours before the earnings call. Logan wasn't there, obviously. He was at home with Maisie, who had a half day from school and wanted to make pancakes. He made pancakes and let her flip 2 of them, which she managed without incident, and then he cleaned up the third one that had gone sideways and hit the cabinet above the stove, and they ate at the kitchen table with the news on in the background. His phone was face up on the table. He wasn't staring at it. He was paying attention to Maisie, who was explaining the plot of something her friend had told her about, some show involving animated animals with emotional problems, which apparently was very compelling. The red one is angry all the time. Maisie said. But it's not because he's mean. It's because he doesn't know how to say he's scared. That's a pretty sophisticated theme, Logan said. It's for kids, Maisie said, with the mild condescension of someone who found adults consistently underestimating children. Logan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Derek. Yamamoto voted with us. Motion failed 4-2, session closed. Logan set the phone back down. Everything okay? Maisie asked. Yeah, Logan said. Everything's okay. You did the face. What face? The one where something happened, but you're not going to tell me about it. She pointed her fork at him. I know that face, Dad. Eat your pancakes, Logan said. She ate her pancakes. He looked at the table and thought about Arya in that board session, 2 miles away, and Yamamoto sitting across from Marsh with the credential documentation in front of him, and the particular quiet of emotion that doesn't pass, and what that silence must feel like after a year of having someone build a case against you. He hoped she'd eaten breakfast. He doubted she had. Oh, the earnings call went well, by every measurable standard. He watched a clip of it later that evening, a short segment that had been posted on a financial news site. Arya was at a podium, and she looked like herself. Not the version he'd seen in the elevator, or at the kitchen island at midnight, but the version from the lobby display case profile, the one the world saw. Controlled, precise, exactly as confident as the situation required, and not 1 degree more. She covered the quarterly numbers, which were good. She covered the product roadmap, which was detailed and specific. And then, when the analyst questions started, and the first one was exactly what Logan had predicted, a careful, professionally couched version of, "Are you okay to be doing this job?" she answered it without flinching. I've been managing a reactive airway condition for several years, she said, looking directly at the camera. It's well controlled with appropriate treatment and monitoring. It has not affected and does not affect my work. I chose not to disclose it publicly because it's a private medical matter. I'm disclosing it now because someone made that choice for me, and I'd rather you hear it from me directly than from a document designed to create doubt. She paused, 1 beat. I'll take the next question. Logan watched that pause. That single beat where she let it land without adding to it, without softening it or explaining it further. He thought about the version of Arya who had pulled herself upright on the second try and refused his hand, and the version who had stood at the whiteboard at 11 at night rewriting the 3rd sentence, and the version on the phone with Yamamoto doing the thing she'd said she didn't normally do because she'd run out of time to do it the way she normally would. He thought about what she'd said. Being good at it is survival. He turned his phone off and put Maisie to bed. He was called into HR on Friday morning. He'd been expecting something. Not this specifically, but something. The situation was too messy, and the building management company's ownership overlap with a Marsh-connected investment group was not, he had since discovered, a coincidence. He'd found that particular thread on Thursday night and had sent it to Arya's attorneys without saying anything to her about it directly. The HR meeting was short and had the compressed, rehearsed quality of something that had been decided before the meeting was scheduled. The facilities operations manager, a man named Phil Garrett, who Logan had never had a single problem with in 4 months, sat across the desk looking like he would genuinely rather be doing anything else. We've received a report of unauthorized access to confidential building management records, Phil said, specifically admin-level data from the credential and access log system. Logan had prepared for this. I have clearance for the building management panel, he said. Standard level 3, which includes access log review. That's documented in my onboarding. Standard level 3 doesn't include credential history for third-party contractor records, Phil said. Logan looked at him. That distinction isn't in the written clearance guidelines. Phil stopped, pressed his mouth together. He looked, Logan thought, like a person reading from a script he'd been handed and knew was wrong. The ownership group has filed a report with our legal team. Pending investigation, we're required to suspend building access. He slid a folder across the desk. Effective end of business today. Logan didn't pick up the folder. Who filed the report? I'm not able to... Phil. Logan kept his voice level. Who filed it? Phil looked at the desk. The silence was its own answer. Logan picked up the folder. All right, he said. Logan, for what it's worth. I know, Logan said. You're doing your job. He walked out of the office, through the lobby, past the display case with Arya's profile and the financial article and the orchid on the concierge desk, and he turned in his keycard and his radio and his maintenance badge, and he walked out of the building into a cold November afternoon. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He'd known this was a possible outcome. He'd known it since the night he'd pulled the access logs and decided to send the photographs to Arya instead of filing them in the maintenance report and forgetting about it. He'd made a choice, and choices had costs, and he was a 32-year-old single father with a maintenance job he no longer had and health benefits that were about to lapse, and a daughter whose school required a lot of poster board. He pulled out his phone. No messages yet from Arya. She might not know yet. He called Mrs. Okafor and asked if she was free on Monday to watch Maisie while he made some calls. She said yes. He thanked her. Then he walked to the train and rode home and sat at the kitchen table for an hour, with the afternoon quiet of an empty apartment around him, thinking through the practical next steps the way he'd been trained to think through systems problems. One part at a time. Find the failure point. Build toward the solution. The failure point here was straightforward. Marsh had connected Logan's credential access to the report he'd written, which meant someone had told him about it. The only people who knew about the report were Arya, Derek, and Arya's legal team, which meant either there was a leak in the legal team or Marsh had inferred it from the FTC complaint's specific technical language. He got out his laptop and pulled up the FTC complaint summary that Arya's attorneys had shared with him. Read the technical description of the unauthorized access. Read the specific reference to credential anomalies and building infrastructure. Then he pulled up the news story about the suspension. There was no news story. It hadn't leaked yet. That meant Marsh wasn't trying to make it public. He was just trying to remove Logan from the building, trying to close the access point he hadn't identified as a threat until the credential report made clear someone had been watching. Logan picked up his phone and texted Arya. They suspended me. Effective today. Credential access to the logs is the stated reason. I think Marsh inferred the source of the complaint technical language. I'm fine. Just wanted you to know before you heard it another way. He set the phone on the table and went to check the mail. When he came back, she'd called. Not texted. Called. He answered. When did it happen? She said, and her voice was different than any version he'd heard before. Not the controlled professional version, not the exhausted midnight version. Something tighter. Something that sounded like anger that was having trouble holding its professional shape. About 2 hours ago, he said. Phil Garrett ran it. Not his call. No, it was not. A pause. He could hear her moving. Logan, Don't, he said. Don't what? Don't apologize. You didn't do this. I involved you in... I involved myself, he said. I knocked on your door. Nobody asked me to. He sat back down at the table. I'm not calling you to make you feel responsible. I'm calling you so you know the connection Marsh made, because that connection tells you something about what he has. A longer pause. When she spoke again, she'd pulled the professional composure back, but it was thinner than usual, worn down at the edges. He knows about the report. He knows someone with building access was pulling credential logs. He may not know the full scope, but he knows enough to be threatened by it. Yes, which means he knows the FTC complaint has technical specificity that matches the access logs. Another pause. Logan, if he's tracked back to the report, he may try to discredit it, challenge the access as unauthorized and therefore inadmissible, Logan said. Yeah, I thought about that. Catherine is already looking at it. The Level 3 clearance language is ambiguous enough that... She stopped. This is not how this was supposed to go. It's fine, Logan said. It's not fine. You lost your job. I'll find another job. He said it plainly because it was true and because making it dramatic wasn't useful. Marsh made a tactical error. He moved on me publicly. Well, semi-publicly, which means he's reacting. He was in control until the FTC complaint, and now he's plugging holes. That's a different position than the one he was in last week. The line was quiet. You're remarkably calm, Arya said. I have practice, Logan said. She was quiet again, and he could hear in that quiet that she was trying to figure out what to do with someone who responded to being fired as a result of helping her by pointing out the strategic silver lining. He understood that. He was in an unusual situation. "I'm going to fix this," she said. "The job, the clearance issue, all of it." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said, and there was something in her voice that was different from the calculation he'd heard before. "I want to." He didn't argue with that. He let it stand the way you let a true thing stand. "How's Maisie?" Arya asked, and it surprised him. The shift in topic, the directness of it. "She's at school," Logan said. "She doesn't know yet." "What will you tell her?" "That I'm between jobs and I'll have a new one soon, and in the meantime we have a little more time together in the mornings." He paused. "Which is actually true." A quiet beat, and then something happened in Arya's voice. Something gave slightly, like a door that's been held shut with effort, and then, for just a moment, isn't. "She drew me beside the orchid," she said. Quiet, almost to herself. "She did. She stopped. "I keep thinking about that." Logan didn't fill the silence. He just let it be. "I'll call you tonight," Arya said, coming back to herself. "After I've spoken to Catherine." "Okay." "Logan," a pause. "I mean it. Thank you." "You said that already." "I know," she said. "I'll say it again. Some things deserve saying more than once." He didn't have an answer for that. She hung up, and he set the phone on the table and sat in his quiet apartment in the middle of a Friday afternoon. And outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, moving forward, indifferent, enormous. And Logan Hart sat in the middle of it and felt, strange as it was, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He pulled out a notepad, started writing down every technical detail he could remember about the credential chain, the access logs, the cable tray, all of it. Every date, every timestamp, every entry. If Marsh was going to try to challenge the evidence, Logan was going to make sure every thread of it was documented somewhere that didn't depend on a building access badge or a company server. He wrote for 2 hours. He was still writing when Maisie came home. She dumped her backpack at the door and came to the kitchen and looked at him at the table with the notepad and said, with devastating accuracy, "You did the face again." "What face?" "The one that means something big happened." She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "Did something break?" Logan put down his pen, looked at his daughter. Her dark hair was half out of its ponytail, and she had a marker stain on her left hand, and she was watching him with the particular gravity she deployed when she'd decided something mattered. "Yeah," he said, "something broke, but I'm working on fixing it." She absorbed this, nodded slowly, the way she did when she was deciding how much she believed you. "Is the lady from the building okay?" Maisie asked. Logan blinked. "What lady?" "The one I drew, with the flowers." Maisie picked up his pen and turned it in her fingers. "She looked like she was trying really hard when I saw her. I've seen you look like that. It means someone has a lot on their mind." She set the pen down. "Is she okay?" Logan looked at his daughter for a long moment. "She's fighting for something important," he said. Maisie thought about this. "Is she going to win?" "I think so," Logan said. "She's pretty good at not stopping." Maisie nodded, satisfied with this, and got up to get a snack. Logan watched her go, and then he looked back at his notepad, at the careful rows of dates and access codes and technical details that were, in their own way, a kind of armor. He picked up his pen. He kept writing. Catherine Reyes had been a securities attorney for 19 years, and Logan could tell within the first 4 minutes of their call that she was the kind of person who didn't waste words on things she wasn't certain about. "The credential access argument is defensible," she said, "but it's going to require a deposition. They'll challenge your clearance classification and will counter with the written policy ambiguity. That takes time." "How much time?" Arya asked. She was on the same call, on speaker from the penthouse. Logan was at his kitchen table with Maisie at school, and 3 days of notes spread in front of him. 3 to 5 weeks before the access question is formally resolved, possibly longer if they push for a full discovery process. "Marsh moves in less than 3 weeks, Arya said. "He's not going to wait for the FTC intake to process." "No," Catherine agreed. "He's not. which is why I want to talk about the financial manipulation angle separately. A pause, the rustling of papers. Logan, in your notes you referenced overhearing a conversation on the 26th floor. Two men, business clothes, references to compliance records, and a narrative push before the quarterly. That's right, Logan said. You wrote down a description of the men. Partial. Age range, one of them had a leather portfolio, both in business attire. I didn't see faces clearly. One of them may have been a consultant named Russell Haig. He works for a data advisory firm that's done 3 contracts for Marsh-connected entities in the past 2 years. He was in the building that evening. The visitor log shows a badge issued to his firm. Catherine's voice didn't change register when she said it, which somehow made it land harder. If Haig was in the building coordinating the data access operation and your description matches him, we have a direct connection between Marsh's network and the physical intrusion. Arya was quiet. Can you put that in front of the FTC? Logan asked. I can put everything in front of the FTC, Catherine said. The question is what the SEC does with the parallel filing, and that depends on whether we can demonstrate that the data access was used to inform a coordinated trading strategy around the health story leak. A beat. If Marsh or his associates held put options on Kensington Systems stock before the leak, and given the timing and the 11% drop, I think that's a question worth asking. Then we're not talking about a hostile board action anymore. We're talking about securities fraud. The kitchen was very quiet. That's a different category, Arya said slowly. Significantly, Catherine said, and it changes his exposure entirely. Logan looked at his notes, thought about the Tuesday evening visitor badge, the dissolved company, the cable tray, the timing of the stock movement. He thought about the kind of planning that required 14 months of setup, a compromised credential, a data advisory consultant walking into a building with a legitimate badge to run a monitoring operation. That wasn't reactive. That was someone who had made a decision a long time ago and had been patient about executing it. He needs the money, Logan said. Both women paused. What? Arya said. Marsh. You said he acquired additional stake 6 months ago, right after you declined the oversight proposal. But acquiring additional stake means he spent money he was betting on getting back through a value shift. If the stock moved the way he planned, you're removed, investor confidence drops, he buys your instability. That's not just about control. That's a financial play. A longer pause from Catherine. That's consistent with what we've been looking at in his entity filings. One of his holding structures took on significant leverage in the past year. He's not just trying to take your company, Logan said. He's trying to pay down debt with it. The line was quiet for a moment. Outside Logan's window, a bus went by. Maisie's school project, a papier-mâché solar system half finished, sat on the counter drying. Normal Tuesday morning things around a conversation that wasn't. Okay, Arya said, and her voice had shifted into the register Logan recognized as decision-making mode, quieter than her regular voice, more precise. Catherine, what do we need from the trading records? A subpoena, which we can get through the SEC inquiry if they open a formal investigation. To get there, I need to demonstrate reasonable basis to investigate. Logan's notes, the credential chain, the timing correlation, and the Hague visitor log together give me that reasonable basis. A pause. I want to file the expanded complaint by end of week. Do it, Arya said. There's a risk. Filing the expanded complaint escalates the conflict publicly. Marsh will know you're going after him personally, not just defending the access question. He fired my maintenance tech, Arya said flatly. He already knows. Logan noted that she said my maintenance tech and decided not to examine it. I'll have the draft to you by Thursday, Catherine said. And Logan, your deposition prep. Can you be available Friday morning? Yes, Logan said. The call ended. The kitchen was quiet again. Logan's phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Arya, texting instead of calling this time. Securities fraud, if Catherine's right about the options. He texted back, changes everything. Her response came fast. Yes. It does. Are you okay? He looked at the text for a second. She asked that question differently now than she would have 3 weeks ago. less like a check-in and more like she actually needed to know. "I'm fine," he wrote. "Maisie wants to know if you like paper mache because she's making the solar system and she says Saturn needs more people to appreciate it." A longer pause than he expected. Then, "Tell her Saturn is underrated and I fully support her project." Logan smiled at his phone, texted back to Maisie's unofficial fan club of one, and went back to his notes. The deposition prep with Catherine on Friday lasted 3 hours and was, in Logan's honest assessment, the most uncomfortable conversation he'd had since the HR meeting with Phil Garrett, but for different reasons. Catherine was thorough in the way that assumed the other side would be worse than thorough, and she walked him through every possible challenge to his credential access argument until he could answer each one without hesitation, cleanly and on the record. Arya sat in on part of it. She'd set up a conference room in her penthouse, a room Logan hadn't seen before, adjacent to the main living area, with a proper table and 4 chairs and a whiteboard that was blank for once. And she listened to the technical questions without interrupting, occasionally making a note on her tablet. When Catherine took a break to take a call, Logan leaned back in his chair and looked at the blank whiteboard. "Feels strange not to have that covered in red lines," he said. Arya glanced at it. "I moved everything to the digital board." Derek said the physical version was making him anxious. Derek is consistently reasonable. "He is." She set down her tablet. "How did the financial model look to you?" The leverage question. Logan had spent 2 evenings running the numbers he could access publicly. Marsh's entity filings, the disclosed stake acquisition, rough timeline correlations. Conservative estimate, he's carrying somewhere between 60 and 90 million in leveraged positions that need the stock to move in his favor. That's not pocket change. That's someone who made a bet and needed it to pay. He paused. He's not a villain in a plan. He's a desperate man in an expensive suit. Arya looked at him. "Does that change how you think about it?" "No," Logan said. "Desperate people who hurt other people to solve their own problems don't get credit for the desperation." She held his gaze. "No, they don't." Catherine came back and the prep session resumed, and Logan gave his account of the cable tray, the badge entry, the conversation on the 26th floor, the dissolve company credential chain, all of it in the flat, precise language of someone who'd been trained to document systems failures and had applied that same discipline to documenting a different kind of failure entirely. When it was done, Catherine closed her folder and said, "You're a good witness. You don't embellish and you don't minimize. My ex-supervisor used to say the only thing worse than a problem you can see is a problem you've described wrong," Logan said. Smart man. He also left before the overtime shift every Tuesday, so take the wisdom in context. Arya made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was clearly working in that direction, and she covered it with a cough, and Logan pretended not to notice. The expanded complaint filed on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, it had been picked up by 2 financial news services, and by Saturday morning, it was in the mainstream press. The headline was different from the one Marsh had engineered 2 weeks earlier. This one read, "Kensington Systems files expanded federal complaint, alleges coordinated data operation and potential securities violations." Logan read it on his phone at 8:15 while Maisie ate cereal and described at length the interpersonal dynamics of her 3rd-grade classroom. And Jonah said that Marcus was copying his project, but Marcus said he wasn't, and I think they were both kind of right, because Marcus wasn't copying exactly, but he got the idea from Jonah's Maisie. "What? Did you finish your Saturn rings?" She considered this question as a non sequitur and then accepted it as topic change. "Almost. I need more aluminum foil. I'll get it today." He set his phone face down and ate his cereal and listened to his daughter talk about the social architecture of 8-year-olds. And it was exactly the right way to spend a Saturday morning when something important and difficult was unfolding 2 miles away and entirely out of his hands. He bought aluminum foil. They finished Saturn together on the kitchen floor, and Maisie narrated facts about Saturn's ring composition with an authority that suggested she'd been reading ahead in her science textbook, and Logan held the strips of foil while she pressed them into the papier-mâché and felt, with a clarity that occasionally surprised him, that this was what he was actually doing all of it for. Not the credential reports, not the depositions, not any of it. This. The SEC opened a formal inquiry on the following Tuesday. Logan found out from Aria, who called him at 7 in the morning, which was earlier than she'd ever called, and her voice had something in it that he hadn't heard before. Not relief exactly, and not triumph, because neither of those was her style. Something more like a long exhale after holding your breath longer than was comfortable. They pulled the trading records for Marsh's holding entities for the 60 days before the leak, she said. I don't have the specifics, but Catherine says the inquiry language suggests they found something. Options? Logan asked. Or equivalent positions? She's not certain yet. A pause. But they opened the inquiry, Logan. They don't open formal inquiries on nothing. No, he said. They don't. He was standing in his kitchen in yesterday's jeans and a sweatshirt, and Maisie was still asleep, and the apartment was quiet with the particular quiet of early morning before the day commits to itself. Outside, the sky over the rooftops was the pale gray-white of a New York winter morning that hadn't decided yet whether to be cold or merely cold-looking. You should eat breakfast, Logan said. A beat. That's what you have to say to that? You called at 7 a.m., which means you've been up for at least 2 hours, which means you probably haven't eaten. I had coffee. That's not food. Logan, Aria. He opened the refrigerator, not for any particular reason, just to have something to do with his hands. The SEC inquiry is good news, and it will still be good news after you've eaten something. Has anything about the past 3 weeks suggested that skipping meals makes the outcomes better? A longer pause, then quietly, no. Then eat breakfast. He heard her moving, the sound of a cabinet. Then, you're very annoying. I've heard that. From who? Maisie, regularly. He closed the refrigerator. I'll call you later, after she's at school and I've looked at what the press is saying. Okay, she said. And then, with an awkward directness that he was starting to recognize as the way she approached things that mattered to her personally, rather than professionally. Logan, when this is over, when the inquiry processes and the board situation resolves, I want to talk to you about something. Okay, he said. Not now, just when there's room for it. I heard you, he said. We will. He hung up and stood in his kitchen and looked at the half-finished solar system on the counter, Saturn's foil rings catching the early light, and felt the weight of that sentence settle in him somewhere. When there's room for it, he knew what it meant. He wasn't sure yet what to do with knowing, so he set it carefully aside in the way you set something carefully aside when it matters too much to examine carelessly, and he started the coffee and waited for Maisie to wake up. Tug. The board moved in the second week of December, not in the direction Marsh had planned. Crane reversed his position first, quietly, through his attorney, citing new information and a desire to ensure the board acted in the best interests of the company and its shareholders. The language was lawyer-written and bloodless, but the message was clear. Crane was reading the SEC inquiry as the exit sign, and he was taking it. Pullman lasted 4 more days. Her resignation letter, which leaked to the press before it was formally accepted, was 2 paragraphs and contained the phrase, I believe it is in everyone's best interest 3 times, which Logan noted was the exact number of times you used a phrase when you were using it to avoid saying what you actually meant. Marsh himself lasted until the second week of January. The SEC inquiry had, by then, become a formal investigation. The trading records had been subpoenaed. The details weren't public yet, but the fact of the investigation was. And it had generated the kind of press coverage that made continued board service an untenable position for a man whose leverage was built on his reputation for strategic savvy. His resignation statement was considerably longer than Pullman's and considerably less honest. It cited personal and business priorities and evolving strategic differences and expressed genuine respect for the company's leadership. It thanked people by name. It was the kind of statement that took 45 minutes to write and said absolutely nothing. Logan read it on his phone while sitting in the waiting area of an employment law office, because he had an appointment to discuss the wrongful termination angle of his suspension which Catherine had connected him with as a secondary action once the main complaint had stabilized. He read Marcia's statement twice. Then he texted Arya, saw it. She responded in 30 seconds. Your thoughts? A lot of words for I got caught. A pause. Then, that's exactly right. Then, come by tonight if you can. I want to tell you something in person. Logan looked at the text, thought about what she'd said on the phone 3 weeks ago. When there's room for it. He texted back, I'll be there at 8. He left Maisie with Mrs. Okafor, who charged $12 an hour and asked no questions beyond, is she fed? And back by 10? He answered yes and probably, and took the train. The building looked the same from the outside. He didn't have his badge anymore. The wrongful termination claim was ongoing, not resolved. So he went through the front entrance like a visitor, which felt strange in the way that only familiar places feel strange when you approach them differently. The front desk called up. The elevator was the same elevator. He rode it to the penthouse floor. Arya answered the door herself. She was in different clothes than she usually wore when he arrived. Not work clothes, not the gray shirt and dark trousers of a person still in operational mode. Just dark jeans and a worn-looking navy sweater that suggested she'd been home for more than an hour and had stopped performing professional readiness for the evening. It was a small difference. It meant something. Hi, she said. Hi, Logan said. She stepped back and he came in, and the war room was gone. The files were still there in organized stacks, but the coffee table was clear. The whiteboard had been erased. 3 laptops instead of 6. Derek was not present. The apartment had the quality of a place that had been in a state of emergency for 2 months and had, very recently, exhaled. She poured 2 glasses of water. Always water with her, he'd noticed. The coffee was operational and the water was personal. And they sat on opposite sides of the kitchen island the way they had in the beginning. Marcia's out, she said. Yeah. The 2 board seats will be filled at the February session. Catherine thinks the SEC case will take 12 to 18 months to fully resolve, but the formal investigation protects the company's position. Investors know the difference between a company under investigation and a company that reported the investigation. How's the stock? Back to within 3% of pre-leak levels. She wrapped her hands around her glass. Which is, given everything, that's better than it had any right to be. Logan nodded, looked at her across the island. You wanted to tell me something in person, he said. She met his eyes. I did. A breath. I want to create a position. Inside the company. Not in the building, in Kensington Systems. A wellness and operational support foundation for employees navigating medical hardship and family caregiving situations. People who are going through what you went through after your wife died. What I went through trying to manage my condition without anyone knowing. She paused. I want someone to lead it who actually understands what those situations feel like from the inside. Not a corporate wellness manager, someone who's lived it. Logan was quiet for a moment. You want to offer me a job, he said. I want to offer you a job, she confirmed. A real one, with real resources behind it. The company is funding it as a permanent initiative, not a pilot. She held his gaze. You'd build it. The structure, the programs, the staff. You'd have full operational authority. Arya. You can think about it. I'm not going to not think about it, Logan said. I'm going to need the actual terms, compensation, benefits, structure. I have a daughter. I don't make decisions like that on the emotional momentum of the moment. Something that might have been relief moved through her expression, like she'd been half expecting him to respond with easy enthusiasm and was reassured that he hadn't. Of course, she said. Derek has the preliminary framework. I wanted to ask you first before the documents existed. Okay, Logan said. I'll look at the framework. Okay, she said. The kitchen was quiet. There's something else, Arya said, and her voice had shifted again. The professional register dropping away until it was just her, talking to him directly, without a layer of management over it. Not about work. Logan waited. She turned her glass in her hands. This was, he'd observed, what she did when she was trying to find the beginning of something she hadn't said before. I've been thinking about what you said, she said. Early on. about watching someone hide something until it was too late. She looked at him. I've been doing that. Not with you. You already knew. But with everyone else. With my board, my investors, my employees, the way I managed the condition in private, the way I built the whole structure of my life around no one getting close enough to see it. She paused. That's not just a medical management strategy, it's a habit, and I've been using it in places it doesn't belong. Logan was looking at her. The press conference, she said, and he knew which one she meant, the one where she'd said, I'd rather you hear it from me directly. That was the first time I've told a room full of people something true about myself without calculating the outcome first. She stopped. It was terrifying. I know, Logan said. I watched it. I know you watched it. A pause. How did it look? He thought about the moment he'd noticed, the single beat of silence before the next question. Like someone who'd decided the truth was worth more than the control, he said. She looked at him for a long time. I'm not very good at this, she said. The personal version of what I just described. I'm good at running companies. I don't have a lot of practice with... She made a small motion with her hand that seemed to cover the general territory of whatever she was trying to say. With trusting people, Logan said. With trusting people, she agreed. Or with... She stopped again. Logan looked at her. She was sitting very still, and her hands were around the glass, and she was looking at the counter, and he recognized what he was watching. Someone stepping toward a thing they were afraid of with the same dogged, imperfect determination they brought to every other kind of difficulty. Arya, he said. She looked up. I'm not in a hurry, he said. I have Maisie to think about, and you have a company to stabilize, and neither of those things is small. He held her gaze. But I'm also not going anywhere. So whenever you find the words, I'll be here. She looked at him, and the careful composure she carried everywhere, the layer she'd built so well over so many years that most people probably didn't know it was a layer, was very thin right now, worn down to the point where he could see what was underneath it. She wasn't perfect. She was difficult in private, and she ate badly under pressure, and she'd spent a decade building walls she was only now learning to examine from the inside. She was 30 years old and had built something extraordinary, and had nearly lost it, and had fought to keep it with a fierceness that most people would never have the stamina to sustain. And she was looking at Logan Hart, who was imperfect in entirely different ways, and he could see in her expression that she was recognizing, maybe for the first time, or maybe for the 100th time this week, and only now admitting it, that she didn't want him to go anywhere either. Okay, she said, quiet, certain. Okay, Logan said. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and endlessly moving. In the apartment, nothing moved at all. And in that stillness, something that had been building slowly for 2 months. Through credential reports and deposition prep and phone calls at 7 in the morning, and a 7-year-old drawing orchids and the single beat of silence before a press conference continued to its next question. That something settled, finally, into its shape. Not finished, not resolved, not without the complicated, ordinary difficulty that was ahead of both of them, but real. Unambiguously, clearly real. Logan finished his water and set the glass down. Send me the framework tonight, he said. I'll read it before Maisie's up tomorrow. Arya reached for her tablet, sent the document in under 30 seconds. She's going to ask about Saturn again, she said. She asks about Saturn constantly, Logan said. She's extremely invested in Saturn. Tell her it held up, Arya said. The rings. Tell her they held. Logan looked at her. I will, he said. He took the elevator down and walked through the lobby, past the orchid that Maisie had drawn, and out into the cold January air, and he breathed it in, and he walked to the train thinking about frameworks and foundation structures, and how you build something that lasts, not perfectly, but durably, with enough honesty in the joints to hold when things get hard. That was how you built anything worth keeping. He knew that. He'd always known that. The framework was 42 pages. Logan read it at 5:30 in the morning, before Maisie woke up, with coffee and the kind of focused attention he used to give to mechanical systems specs, looking for what was missing as much as what was there. It was thorough and it was serious, and whoever had drafted the initial structure had done real research into employee support programs at comparable companies, and had been honest about where those programs fell short. He made 12 pages of notes, not objections, observations. Places where the structure needed weight, where the language was corporate soft and needed to be harder and more specific, where the eligibility criteria were so broad they'd collapse under their own scope. At 7:15, he texted Arya, "Read it. Good bones. Needs significant revision before it's operational. Can we talk Thursday?" Her response came while Maisie was brushing her teeth. "Thursday works. Bring your notes." He brought 31 pages of notes. Derek looked at the stack when Logan set it on the conference room table and made a face that suggested he found this either impressive or exhausting and hadn't decided which. The Thursday meeting lasted 4 hours. Arya sat across from him and they went through the framework section by section, and twice she pushed back on his revisions, and he pushed back on her pushback, and they argued, not angrily, but with the specific friction of two people who both knew what they were talking about and weren't willing to be polite at the expense of being right. The second argument lasted 20 minutes and ended with Arya writing something on the whiteboard and Logan looking at it and saying, "Okay, that's better," in a tone that conceded the point without making it dramatic. Derek, who had been taking notes throughout, looked between them with the expression of someone watching a tennis match and trying to keep up. "Is this what it's always going to be like?" Derek asked during a break. "Probably," Logan said. "Good," Derek said. The previous framework meetings were very quiet, and the output was terrible. The revised foundation framework took 6 weeks to finalize. Logan worked on it from his apartment, from coffee shops, from the library, 2 blocks from Maisie's school, when he had hours to fill between morning drop-off and afternoon pickup. He talked to people, employees at other companies who'd navigated serious illness while working, single parents who'd fallen through the cracks of corporate wellness programs that were designed for people with partners and backup systems, HR specialists who told him frankly what worked and what was theater. He wasn't being paid yet. The wrongful termination claim was still processing, and the formal job offer was contingent on the board's February approval of the foundation as a company initiative. He had savings that were not comfortable but were sufficient, and the employment attorney Catherine had connected him with had been encouraging about the eventual outcome, and Arya had offered, twice, to advance him something against the future salary. He'd said no, twice. The second time she'd looked at him with an expression that combined frustration and something closer to respect. "You're doing this on principle," she said. "I'm doing this because I don't want the foundation to start with a financial entanglement that makes the independence question complicated." "That's a principle." "It's a practical position," Logan said. "There's a difference." She looked at him. "Is there?" He thought about it. "Not in this case," he admitted. She almost smiled. "That's the most honest thing you've said today." "I said 20 honest things today. The other 19 were also accurate, but this one had more self-awareness." This was how they talked now. Not the careful professional distance of the early weeks, not the exhausted directness of 3 a.m. crisis management, but something in between and new, with a rhythm that had developed gradually and without announcement. They disagreed often. They were direct with each other in ways that would have been rude with anyone else, and weren't rude between them because they'd both decided that accuracy mattered more than comfort. They made each other laugh sometimes, usually unexpectedly, usually because one of them had said something precise enough to be funny. Maisie, who had been told only that Arya was a person her father worked with, had arrived at her own conclusions through the infallible social intelligence of an 8-year-old. "She calls a lot," Maisie observed one evening. "We're working on something together," Logan said. "Is it like a friendship or a work thing?" "It's a work thing." Maisie considered this. "Can it be both?" "Sometimes things are both," Logan said. Maisie nodded slowly in the manner of someone filing information for later use and returned to her book, and Logan did not pursue the subject. The board approved the foundation in the second week of February. It was named the Hart Kensington Employee Wellness Foundation, which Logan had argued against on the grounds that putting his name on it before it had accomplished anything felt presumptuous. And Arya had said that it was his work and his framework, and she wasn't removing his name from it. And they had, for the first time, argued about something that wasn't about the work itself, but about how he saw himself in relation to it. He'd been quiet after that. "You do that," Arya said. Do what? Minimize your part in things. You write 30 pages of notes and argue 4 hours for the right structure and then push back against having your name on the outcome. I'm not... Logan? She said it the way he sometimes said her name. Level. Factual. You are. He looked at the table. Old habit, he said finally. From when? He thought about 6 years of engineering work at a firm where the senior partners took the credit and the junior staff did the labor, and 3 years after that of managing everything alone without the structural scaffolding of a title or a salary to confirm that what he was doing had value. Long time, he said. Arya looked at him steadily. Your name is on the foundation, she said. That's final. He let it stand. Some arguments were worth having, and some were worth losing, and the difference between them was usually about whether winning would cost you something more important than the argument itself. He started officially in March. The office was on the 14th floor of the Kensington Systems building, a real office with a window and a small conference table and a staff of 3 to start, a program coordinator, a case manager with a background in social work, and an administrative assistant named Priya, who was 26 and operated at a speed that Logan found both impressive and slightly alarming. The first week was logistics and systems. The second week was intake, the first employees reaching out through the confidential referral channel Priya had set up. Most of them were cautious. Most of them had been managing difficult situations quietly for a long time and weren't sure whether this was a real resource or a corporate performance of care that would evaporate the first time it became inconvenient. Logan understood that. He told every person he met with in those early weeks the same thing. This program exists because someone who runs this company knows what it costs to go through something alone. It's not going away. Some of them believed him immediately. Some of them waited to see if it was true. That was reasonable. He waited with them. Arya visited the office at the end of the second week. She stood in the doorway and looked at the small space, the intake forms Priya had designed, the resource binders the case manager had assembled, the whiteboard Logan had put up with the current active cases anonymized and tracked the way he'd tracked building maintenance issues. How many so far? She said. 11 active cases, 4 resolved referrals, 3 pending intake. He paused. 1 woman whose husband has stage 2 lung cancer. She's been managing his treatment schedules around her work hours for 8 months without telling her supervisor because she was afraid of being seen as unreliable. Arya was quiet. She's not unreliable, Logan said. She's holding an enormous amount together, and she needed someone to say out loud that that was real and that there were resources to help. He looked at the board. That's most of them. They're not looking for someone to solve everything. They just need confirmation that they're not invisible. Arya looked at the board for a long time. Is it what you expected? She asked. More or less. The administrative piece is more complicated than I built for. I'm going to need a second case manager by July. He paused. You'll get the budget request Thursday. Okay, she said. And then, quieter. Logan. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. Not the same thank you as the elevator. Not the professional acknowledgement of a completed task. Something that had more weight in it. Something that was about more than the foundation. You funded it, he said. You built it, she said. There's a difference. He held her gaze. There is, he said. Oh. Spring came the way it comes to New York. Abruptly, after too long, like the city had been holding out and then gave all at once. The trees in the small park near Logan's apartment went from bare to green in what felt like a week. Maisie started a new drawing project, something involving maps of fictional countries, and spent her afternoons at the kitchen table with colored pencils and the focused intensity of someone engaged in important cartographic work. Logan watched his daughter across the kitchen one evening in late April and thought about the year behind them, the night in the elevator, the credential report, and the deposition, and the SEC inquiry and Phil Garrett's face across the HR desk, the foundation taking its first shape on his kitchen table, the slow, particular way that Arya Kensington had let him close enough to see her clearly, and how difficult that had been for her, and how she'd done it anyway. He thought about what it cost to let people in after you'd learned, through real experience and real loss, that letting people in was a form of risk, He'd learned that lesson when his wife died. He'd applied it by building a life that was small and controlled and sufficient, a life organized around Maisie and work, and nothing that could be taken away in a way that would undo him. He hadn't planned on a woman on the floor of an elevator. He hadn't planned on any of it. Maisie looked up from her map. Dad? Yeah. Are you going to marry Arya? Logan looked at his daughter. She held his gaze with complete composure, colored pencil still in her hand. What makes you ask that? He said. Because you get the face. Maisie. The one that's not the something broke face, and not the I'm tired face, she said with clinical precision. The one you get when you're thinking about something you haven't decided yet, but you already know. She looked back at her map and made a small addition to a coastline. It's okay if you do. She's good at Saturn. Logan looked at his daughter for a long moment. She is, he said. And she's not fake, Maisie added. Some of the people who come to pick you up at work are fake. You can tell. She's not. He didn't ask how an 8-year-old had developed a reliable fake detection system. He suspected it was the same way she'd developed everything else, by watching, carefully, and drawing her own conclusions. I'll keep that in mind, Logan said. Maisie nodded and returned to her cartography. Logan picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. He texted Arya. Are you free Saturday afternoon? She responded in 3 minutes. I can be. Why? I want to show you something. Bring shoes you can walk in. A pause. Then, should I be alarmed? No. Bring Maisie appropriate energy. Another pause, longer. Then, okay. The rooftop garden on the building where he worked, where he used to work technically, though the wrongful termination claim had by now been settled quietly in his favor and his building access had been formally restored. Not that he needed it anymore. That garden had been the place where he'd felt, for the first time, that the wall around a certain version of his future had a door in it. He'd been up there 6 months into the job, on a break at 2 in the morning, and he'd looked out at the city and thought about how strange it was that he'd ended up here. Maintenance tech in Manhattan, single father, former engineer, person who had lost something enormous and rebuilt something functional in its place. And he'd felt, not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that was about being still long enough to recognize that what you had was enough. He'd thought about that night a lot in the past few months. He took them there on Saturday afternoon, up through the building, with Sandra at the front desk waving them through with the familiarity of someone who'd watched a 7-year-old draw orchids in her lobby. And Maisie, who had been told only that there was a garden on the roof, pushed through the door and stopped. Manhattan was in every direction. The Hudson catching the afternoon light to the west, the Midtown skyline to the north, the April sky pale blue with thin clouds moving through it. The garden itself was small by any measure. Raised planters, a few benches, some early spring flowers starting to open. But at 32 stories up, surrounded by the city, it didn't feel small. Maisie said, "Oh." Then she walked straight to the railing and looked out, and Logan watched her face do the thing it did when she encountered something that exceeded her existing vocabulary, and he thought, there it is. Arya was standing just behind him. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the city, not at Maisie, and her expression had the quality he'd seen in the lobby that first day when she'd watched Maisie draw. That particular stillness, looking at something ordinary that had been outside her frame for so long it had become extraordinary. She caught him watching, didn't look away. "You used to come up here at night," she said. It wasn't a question. "On breaks," Logan said. "Yeah. I could see the garden from the penthouse on clear nights. I didn't know anyone ever used it." She looked back out over the city. "I thought it was decorative." "Most things people think are decorative have a different use," Logan said. She looked at him. A long moment. The spring wind moving between them. The city doing what it always did below. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I've been trying to figure out how to say something for about 3 months." "I know," he said. "You don't have to have it perfectly figured out." "I know I don't." She was quiet for a second. "That's new, by the way, knowing I don't have to have it figured out before I say it." She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. "I don't have a lot of reference points for this. For trusting someone enough to let them see the version of me that isn't running anything. I've seen it, Logan said. The floor of the elevator, remember? She made a short sound. Not quite a laugh, but close. That's not the version I mean. I know. I mean the version that... She stopped. Started again. You called me at 7 in the morning to tell me to eat breakfast. You argued with me for 20 minutes about eligibility criteria and then told me my revision was better. You wrote 30 pages of notes on a framework I drafted and made every part of it stronger and then didn't want your name on it. She was looking at him steadily. I've been surrounded by people my whole professional life who wanted something from me. Position, access, money, leverage. You wanted me to sleep and eat and stop hiding something that was making me sick to carry alone. Logan was quiet. I don't know what to do with that, Arya said. I mean, I know what I feel. I've known for a while. She exhaled. I'm not good at being the one who needs something. I know, Logan said. You're not supposed to say, I know, she said. You're supposed to say something reassuring. You don't want reassurance, Logan said. You want someone to be honest with you. She looked at him for a long moment. You're infuriating, she said. Maisie says the same thing. Maisie is very smart. I've told her that. She agrees. The wind moved through the garden. Below them, the city went on, enormous and indifferent as always, not caring at all about two people on a rooftop trying to find the right words for something that didn't have clean words, only honest ones. I'm in love with you, Arya said. Direct. The way she said everything that mattered. No preamble, no softening. Just the true thing, stated clearly. The way she'd stated the true thing at the press conference when she'd had every reason not to. I've been trying to be careful about it because of your situation, and because of mine, and because the timing has been... She gestured vaguely at the past 6 months of their lives. What it's been. But I'm tired of being careful about it. Logan looked at her. He thought about all the ways the past 4 months had changed the shape of his days. The 7:15 texts, the Thursday meetings that ran long. The way she'd started sending him articles she'd read that made her think of the foundation. Not because they were useful, but because she wanted to share them with someone she trusted. The way she'd sat with him for an hour one Sunday when he'd been quieter than usual, 3 weeks before what would have been his late wife's birthday, and hadn't pushed and hadn't left, and had simply been there. He thought about Maisie saying she's not fake with the flat certainty of someone stating a fact that required no argument. I know, he said. And then, because she was right that she deserved more than that, I've been in love with you since approximately the 3rd time you told me to stop telling you to sleep, which I think means you started it. She stared at him. You were very annoying about it, he said. For the record, I was annoying. The Yamamoto call, he said. You argued with me for 10 minutes about whether to make it, and then made it, and it worked, and you still didn't want to admit I was right. You were insufferably right. I usually am. That is the most arrogant thing you've said since I met you. It's accurate. She was looking at him, and the expression on her face was the one he'd seen in the lobby and on the rooftop and at the kitchen island at midnight. That unguarded version, the one that didn't have a layer over it. Except it was clearer now, more certain of itself. He crossed the 2 feet between them and put his hand against her face, and she leaned into it slightly, the way you lean into something you've been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become its own weight, and then it lifts. He kissed her. She kissed him back, and it wasn't perfect. Maisie made a noise behind them that was either approval or mild disgust. It was hard to tell. And the city was loud and the wind was cold, and neither of them had figured out all the complicated logistics of what happened next. None of that mattered just then. Bum. The SEC formal investigation concluded 14 months after it opened. Gerald Marsh and 2 associates of his primary holding company agreed to a settlement involving disgorgement of profits, civil penalties totaling $61 million, and a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. The settlement included no admission of wrongdoing, which was standard, which meant Marsh got to keep telling himself the story he'd always told, and the world got to know exactly what had happened regardless. Russell Haig, the consultant from the data advisory firm, cooperated with the investigation in exchange for reduced penalties. His testimony confirmed the coordination between the data access operation and the trading strategy. Phil Garrett, who had executed Logan's suspension under pressure from the building management company's ownership structure, gave a voluntary statement and was not named in the enforcement action. Logan found out about the settlement from Catherine, who called him on a Wednesday afternoon in early spring while he was reviewing case files in his office on the 14th floor. "It's done," Catherine said. "How's Arya taking it?" "I haven't spoken to her yet. I called you first." Logan looked out his window at the New York spring below. "Why?" "Because you built the evidentiary foundation that made the whole thing possible," Catherine said. "A credential report from a maintenance technician who didn't have to write it and filed it anyway. That was the first thread. I wanted you to know before it became a press release." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Catherine." "Thank Maisie," Catherine said. "I hear she has opinions about Saturn." She hung up. Logan sat with the quiet for a minute, then picked up his phone and called Arya. She answered on the second ring. "Catherine reached me," she said. "Me too." "She called you first." "Yes." A pause. "Of course she did," Arya said. Not bitter. Something warmer than that. "How do you feel?" Logan thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything. "Tired," he said. "Satisfied. Relieved it's on the record." He paused. "Glad it's over." "Yeah," Arya said. Quiet. "Me too." "Go home early," Logan said. "For once." "I am home." "Go somewhere that isn't an office then. Inside or outside the building, I don't care." "Logan?" "Arya." A pause. Then the sound of her moving. "Fine. I'm walking to the kitchen." "That's a start." "You're impossibly annoying. Eat something while you're there." She made a sound of defeat that was also, underneath it, unmistakably fond, and he heard the refrigerator open, and that was enough. He asked her to marry him in October, not on a planned evening, not in a restaurant or with a speech he'd rehearsed. He asked her on the rooftop garden on a Saturday afternoon in October when Maisie was with Mrs. Okafor and the city below them had the particular quality of autumn light that made everything look like it was finishing something well. He'd had the ring for 3 weeks. He'd been waiting for the right moment and had eventually accepted that there wasn't a right moment. There was only the moment you chose, and the choosing was the point. He'd taken Maisie with him to pick the ring. This was not traditional, but tradition had never been the point. Maisie had taken the responsibility seriously and had examined 4 options with a concentration that the jeweler clearly found both touching and slightly unnerving. She'd chosen a ring with a dark blue sapphire. "Because it's not trying to be the most expensive thing in the room," she'd said, and the jeweler had laughed, and Logan had bought that one. On the rooftop, he took it out and held it and said, "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for about 3 months." Arya looked at him, a slow recognition moving across her face. "Those are my words." "They worked," Logan said. "I'm borrowing them." She looked at the ring, then at him. "Maisie picked it," Logan said. "She said it wasn't trying to be the most expensive thing in the room." Arya looked at the ring for a long moment. Her jaw did the thing it did when she was holding something together. But it wasn't the controlled composure of the woman in the elevator, the layer she'd worn over everything. This was different. This was something trying to get out rather than something being kept in. "I'm not easy to be with," she said. "I know," Logan said. "I'm not either. I work too much. I go quiet when I'm stressed, and I don't always tell you why. I still check my phone during dinner even though I know it bothers you." "Arya, I'm being honest. I know you are. And I'm telling you that I already know all of that, and I'm still here on this rooftop asking you." He paused. "I'm 33 years old. I have an 8-year-old who thinks you're the definitive expert on Saturn. I went through something that I thought had permanently reduced the size of what was possible, and then a woman on the floor of an elevator turned out to be the most honest person I'd ever met once she stopped being afraid of being seen." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking because things are easy. I'm asking because they're real." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. The word came out clear and certain and without hesitation, the way she said everything she was sure of. "Yes." Her hands were not steady when he put the ring on. His weren't either. The ring fit, which Maisie had somehow accounted for, and the afternoon light was on the Hudson, and the city was below them doing what it always did. He pulled her close, and she let him, and they stood there on the rooftop where he used to come at 2 a.m. to breathe, and this time he was breathing differently. They married in February, 14 months after Marsh resigned. Private ceremony. 31 people. The foundation staff, Derek, Catherine, Sandra, from the front desk, Mrs. Okafor, who wore a hat that deserved its own invitation, a small number of Aria's closest associates who had stayed through everything, and 2 of Logan's former colleagues from the engineering firm who had maintained contact through the years. No formal venue. The penthouse, arranged by Derek with a seriousness of purpose that was entirely sincere. Maisie, in a dress she'd selected herself and shoes she'd complained about for 2 days prior and wore without complaint on the day, stood next to her father during the ceremony with the composure of someone who had known how this would end long before the adults figured it out. When the officiant asked for anyone with an objection, Maisie looked around the room with a brief, assessing gaze and apparently found none because she turned back to the front and nodded slightly. Aria caught it, caught Logan's eye above Maisie's head. The look between them was the kind that didn't need words because it was made entirely of shared understanding. At the reception, such as it was, people with food and drinks in a living room that used to be a war room, Mrs. Okafor found Logan near the window and took his arm. "She's good for you," Mrs. Okafor said. "Different kind of strength than yours, but good." "Yeah," Logan said. "Maisie thinks so. Maisie's the authority on most things." Mrs. Okafor looked across the room to where Aria was listening to Derek tell some story with her full attention, the way she gave her full attention to things she actually cared about. "She was very alone before you." Logan looked at his wife. "I know. So were you." I know that too." Mrs. Okafor patted his arm. "Good," she said, and went to find more food. Logan stood at the window with his drink and watched his daughter drag Aria toward the corner, where she'd apparently set up a display of her fictional country maps and was now explaining the geopolitical situation of a landlocked nation called Estevar. And Aria was listening with an expression of complete genuine attention, asking questions, and Maisie was answering with the satisfied authority of someone being taken seriously. He watched them and thought about the year behind him. Not the story of it, the corporate intrigue, the credentials and the compliance and the federal complaints, but the texture of it. The way it had been built from small things, a decision to open an elevator door, a decision to write down what he'd heard, a decision to tell someone a true thing rather than a comfortable one, a decision to ask for help and to offer it, and to stay when it would have been easier to step back. He was not a person who believed that things worked out because they were meant to. He'd had enough evidence against that to make the argument convincingly. Things worked out, when they did, because people made choices. The right ones, the hard ones, the ones that didn't have guaranteed returns. He had made those choices. So had Aria, in her own way and at her own cost, learning over decades how to let the armor down without feeling like she was losing what it protected. That wasn't destiny. That was work. The particular unglamorous daily work of being honest and present and willing to be seen clearly by another person. Maisie was now narrating the agricultural system of Estevar. Aria was genuinely asking about the crop rotation. Derek had materialized nearby and was listening with an expression that suggested he was considering Estevar as a potential investment market. Logan crossed the room. "How's Estevar's trade situation?" he asked, coming up beside Aria. "Complicated," Aria said, without missing a beat. "There's a river dispute with the neighboring territory." "Falundra," Maisie said, very seriously. "Right," Logan said. "Falundra. Classic problem." Maisie gave him a look that said she knew he was improvising and would tolerate it on this occasion. Aria's hand found his, briefly, and then she turned back to the map, and Maisie resumed her briefing, and Derek asked what Estevar's primary export was, and the evening was full of ordinary noise. Months in. A year later, Logan sat in his office on the 14th floor on a Wednesday afternoon and looked at the board he'd kept since the beginning. The active cases, anonymized, current status. 47 employees across 7 company sites, 212 cases resolved since the foundation opened. A budget that had tripled from the original allocation. 3 additional case managers. A peer support network that had grown entirely on its own without Logan designing it, because people who'd been helped had started showing up to help others. He had a standing meeting with Arya every Thursday at noon. Not about the foundation specifically. They'd long since formalized the reporting structure so that the foundation operated with real independence, but about whatever was on the table that week. The meetings usually ran 40 minutes and often drifted sideways into something that wasn't work at all, which was, he suspected, the actual point. She came to his office sometimes unannounced, in the way of someone who had stopped calculating whether they had a sufficient reason to be somewhere and had started acting on the simpler logic of wanting to be there. He was glad of it, every time. He thought about something she'd said early on, before any of it, sitting on the floor of her elevator with her back against the mirror, and the first thing she'd said when she came back to herself had not been fear or confusion, but a demand for silence. That had been her instinct, built over years. Silence. Control the information. Reduce the exposure. He understood now that the demand had not been about him. It had been about the weight she'd been carrying in a world that had taught her, through specific and painful experience, that being seen as vulnerable meant being seen as available to be used. He had not been another person trying to use her vulnerability. He had just been a maintenance technician at 11:47 on a stormy Tuesday who had opened the door because there was a light that was the wrong color and someone might need help. That was all. And sometimes, all was enough. The Foundation's second annual report was due at the end of the month. Logan pulled it up on his laptop and began reading through the draft. There was a section near the end, his case manager had written it, about the founding intent of the program. The language was good but slightly formal, the way institutional language always became when it tried to capture something personal. He opened a new document and rewrote the section himself, in plain language, the same way he'd once written a credential report for a securities attorney. Without embellishment, without making it sound larger than it was, with every important thing stated clearly. This foundation was built on the recognition that people going through difficult circumstances don't always fail because of the difficulty. They fail because they're trying to carry it alone, in silence, in a world that has given them reasons to believe that visibility means risk. This program exists to change that equation, not by removing the difficulty, but by removing the silence around it. He read it over, left it as written. Outside his window, New York was doing what it always did. He had a meeting in 40 minutes, and Maisie had a presentation at school tomorrow about Estevar's river dispute with Falundra, which she had spent 3 days preparing for with a seriousness that suggested she intended to annex Falundra before the school year was out. And there was a dinner tonight that was supposed to be the 3 of them, but would probably end up being the 3 of them, plus Derek, as it often did, because Derek had discovered that Logan and Arya's kitchen produced better food than his own. These were the ordinary details of a life that had been rebuilt from something broken. Not rebuilt into the same shape, into a different shape, one that fit the people doing the living. That was all any of it ever was. The work you did. The choices you made. The people you stayed for and the people who stayed for you, not because it was easy or guaranteed or without cost, but because some things were worth showing up for every day in all the ordinary, imperfect difficulty of an ordinary, imperfect life. Logan closed the annual report draft, picked up his phone, texted Arya, "What do you want for dinner?" Her response came back in a minute. "Not coffee. That's not an answer." "It's a start," she wrote. "Isn't that what you always say?" He looked at the text, smiled at it in the empty office with no one to see. "Yeah," he wrote back. "It is."